Hey, it's Squidly. A lot is said among backpackers about listening to your body, but not much is ever said about how exactly you go about doing that. And so what I want to share with you today is my experience with listening to my body and how I go about doing that. I think before we can really have a conversation about how we listen to our bodies, really the conversation needs to start with talking about the tool that you use to listen to that body, and it's not your ears, it's your mind. So a couple of years ago, I ended a career in education, 27 years of not just trying to educate kids, but also part of being an educator is just kind of life coaching them. And one of the discussions that I had with kids all the time when they would be kind of down on themselves or saying I can't or I don't know what the answer is, frequently my answer to that was, well, if you did know the answer, what would it be? Well, now that's kind of an odd way to go about talking about how you listen to your body, but the fact is the brain is the dumbest organ in the body. How can that be? That's the one that you use to think with. Well, it works like this. And again, at my age, this is just sort of life experience talking, I guess. The mind will do whatever you tell it to do. So if you tell it, I'm hurting, so I can't, it goes into motion, coming up with all the reasons why you can't and the way you get yourself out of this situation. In other words, it does, in kind of a negative way, exactly what you tell it to do. On the other hand, in maybe a little bit more positive way, it also does what you tell it to do when you say to it, I don't have a choice. I have to figure this out. And even if there's no immediate, obvious solution, the process of just telling yourself, I don't have a choice, puts your mind into motion, figuring out what the possible solutions are. And that's the reason why I start a conversation about listening to your body with considering the mind first. Because whatever it is that your body is experiencing, you have to be in control of what your thoughts are. You have to be in total control of telling your mind what is actually going on instead of letting your body and mind have conversations outside of your executive control. You have to have control over those thoughts, get control of them, and make that conversation go the way you need it to go. Now, that's not to say make it go in such a way that you're going to force yourself to do things that you're really not ready to do because of an injury. Instead, it's being in total control of that conversation between your body and your mind and what your body is actually saying, so that your mind doesn't start making decisions based on erroneous information. All right, a good psychologist could take that topic and make a great video out of it and spend hours just delving into that. So I'm going to stop right there because I am not a mental health professional and move on to the physical part. As I go into listening to your body, I have a great example. It's a recent example. It was right at New Year's, and it was on the Pine Mountain Trail, hiking along, and there's an edge on the trail where it kind of drops off, and I stepped, and the trail just kind of crumbled and fell away, and when it did, I fell over and landed pretty hard on my left hip and tweaked my right knee on the way down. So I had all of that to happen kind of in one motion, and I didn't realize I was falling until I was on the ground. So I landed pretty hard and got up and sort of just took a minute. I was with a couple of other guys. I was with Crow from As the Crow Flies Hiking. I was with Terry Young from Terry Young Outdoors, and they were good enough to say, okay, yeah, let's stop for just a minute and give you a chance to sort of collect yourself before we move on. Well, everything at that moment sort of hurt. But what you have to assess is the difference between things that hurt and things that are injured. And there is a difference, and frequently right after an accident or right after an injury, you don't really know which one it is. Are you just hurting or are you really injured? And you've got to assess which one it is. And sometimes the answer to that is not immediately available to you. Even though the answer to what's the difference between a hurt and an injury might be obvious, let's flesh that out just a little bit before we move on. Something that's hurt is something that just is causing you some mild pain. That is, it hurts, hence the name hurt, but it's not debilitating. The amount of pain is not going to keep you from continuing on and doing what you're doing. On the other hand, an injury is where you've done real damage either to a bone or to soft tissue in such a way that you're unable to continue on, or if you do continue on, it's really going to make matters worse. And to go back to the hurt, even though there's some pain involved, it's not necessarily going to make things worse for you. It's not going to create an injury or make it so that your recovery from it is going to be significantly extended. So after that fall, I wasn't immediately sure whether I was just hurt or if I was injured. At that point, my guess was, I'm just hurt. And I made sure to engage my brain in that conversation, my conscious thinking about which one it is, because I did not want my body saying, okay, this hurts, I really want to stop. And my brain just listened to it going, okay. And so I got control of that conversation and said, okay, yeah, right now this hurts a little bit, but I don't think I'm injured. And so for that reason, we're going to keep going. Now, maybe we adjust our pace a little bit and sort of walk a little bit gingerly for a little while and kind of loosen everything back up and get going. But right now, I'm thinking I'm just hurt, not injured. And so I hiked for the rest of that day, and it was hurting a little bit, but at that point, I really wasn't sure still. And when I went to bed that night, I still was not sure if I was injured or if it just hurt. I really just had not nailed that down yet. But at that point, I was telling everybody else, yeah, I'm down for the hike. We're going to keep going. And I'll, my pace may be off just a little bit, but I'm going to stick this thing all the way out. The next morning, everything that I had hurt was still hurting a little bit. It was still stiff. And as I got going hiking, the knee really loosened up to a point where I didn't even feel the knee anymore. I maybe put in a mile and a half, and the pain there sort of just went away. But as the miles started to pile up, it was the hip that started to really ache and make me think, okay, I may not be able to continue going. But again, I had to engage my mind in this so that my executive thinking was the one that was in charge, and not just random thoughts from my mind saying, yeah, this hurts, let's stop. I wanted to make sure that if I stopped, it was because going to continue was going to make matters worse for my body. Later on that day, I figured out if I keep going, I'm going to really make matters worse. And so fortunately, I had kind of a bailout plan. I didn't bail on the whole rest of the trip, but I bailed out on some of the miles for the rest of that day. And fortunately, I was kind of rescued by Senior Hiker 77, who picked me up and took me to a closer point where I could get to camp, and turned out to be the smartest thing I could have done. Now, the question I think should be asked is, how do you know the difference between a hurt and an injury? Well, just like in the example, you may not know right off the bat which one it is. It may take a little while of continuing to walk or do whatever other activity you're doing in order to figure out, okay, is this just hurting or am I actually injured? And sometimes that answer is immediately available to you, and sometimes you kind of have to work it out and figure out, okay, what's going on here? But every time you feel pain, that doesn't necessarily mean you jump to injured. And so the question is, how do you know? Well, I don't know that I have a very good answer. I have an answer, I just don't know how good it is. The fact is, you have to have in your life racked up some experience with hurts and injuries. The only way to really know is to have experience with hurts and have experience with things that hurt and continuing to push through in order to keep going and to be able to determine later on, okay, was this something just hurting or am I actually injured? And without any experience with it, frankly, I don't think you can make good decisions about that. Keep in mind, when your body is hurting, when you like when I fell on that trail and it was hurting, my body is telling my mind, this hurts, I really want to stop. And of course the mind is, yeah, I'm sensing all of this pain and I really don't want to make this any worse. What the mind really wants to do is find a comfort zone. And that's not necessarily the right course to take when something is just hurting and not really injured. Unfortunately, by the time you reach my age, you've had plenty of experiences with things that hurt and unfortunately accidents where things are really injured. And so it's easier to listen to the body and make that determination with some experience behind you, because your body will say a lot of things, especially when something's hurting. It'll say that I don't want to keep going. And maybe you shouldn't. Maybe something really is injured, but maybe something just hurts and you just need to take a minute and sort of collect yourself so that you can move on. And unfortunately, the only thing I can say about that is you just have to have enough experience with your body and with hurts and injuries to know what it is that your body is saying. So backpackers say all the time, well, you got to listen to your body. But if you don't have any experience listening to your body, you have no idea what it's saying. You have to have some experience with what those things are to be able to interpret what it is that your body is saying. So sometimes it does say, yeah, this hurts really bad. But is it saying I'm injured? Or is it just saying this hurts really bad? So those are my thoughts on listening to your body. And my thoughts on this are not the final word. In fact, maybe it's just the beginning of a conversation. Instead, what I would like for you to do is go to the comments and add your perspective on this. What's your experience with it? How do you listen for whether you're hurt or injured? How do you listen to your body? What does your body tell you when it's one or the other? And on the way out, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.